All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to Know Who Drives Return, brought to you by Boardroom Alpha. I'm David Dropkin, joined again by Joanna Macris. And today it's our pleasure to have on Emiliano Kargieman, who's the CEO and founder of Satellogic. Satellogic recently went public via a SPAC transaction, CF Acquisition 5. It closed last month in January. So first, congratulations on the listing. And thanks for taking the time to speak to us today.
Thanks, David, Joanna. Great to be here.
Awesome. So how about just to kick things off, how about a little bit of an introduction to Emiliano, a bit about your background and what led you to the founding of the company?
Sure. So my background is in technology, but I don't come from the aerospace industry. I came into the aerospace industry, but I have a history of building technology companies. I started very young with my first software company when I was 15 years old. And after a long time in software and then a brief stint in venture capital, I started to focus on this intersection of problems between energy, food production, distribution, or energy generation and distribution, and how we manage natural resources to do that. And that ended up leading me down the path of eventually funding Satellogic as a way to figure out how to collect data of what's happening in the planet and put it in the hands of people at the right price point. So over 30 years now building technology companies, and it's been a great run.
Great. And then on that sort of, the natural question, what made, now the right time, the right opportunity did you feel to, take that step and jump into the public markets via maybe, doing another private capital raise or other sort of, funding event?
Sure. And I think for us, as an industry, I think this is the right time for the Earth observation industry because we're coming of age. We're coming to a point where we can deliver on the promises that we have been making to the markets for a long time. And for us at Satellogic, this is the right tool for us at this moment. Even though we're building satellites that are individually maybe 1,000 times less expensive than a traditional Earth observation satellite, and we have 100 times better unit economics, this is still a capital intensive industry. We're still looking to put 200 satellites in orbit over the next couple of years. And that requires capital. So having access to the public market is really a great tool for that, to having a great source of capital that we can tap into to fund the business. So I think both for the industry in general and for us in particular, this was the right time.
Right. And it seems, obviously some of your competitors also, chose that route. So, in a little bit, I want to ask you about sort of how to position yourself via them. But one of the more, one of the dynamics right now for the SPAC transactions, right, are these high redemptions. And so, obviously you guys experienced some high redemptions around the deal. But then you also recently announced, a $150 million investment from Liberty. So I wanted to ask you about that investment, sort of the rationale behind it, and sort of, are you trying to create a partnership there? What does that bring to the table a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I mean, we were expecting, it's the dynamics of the SPAC market, as I said lately. So we were expecting a high number of redemptions, and in that context, we went out and looked for, who could be the right partner to help us get the business funded, and at the same time get a strong position to start trading as a public company. Liberty Strategic Capital is essentially the ideal partner for us, right? I mean, they bring both, of course, the capital of 150 million, which is great in this particular timing, but also, Secretary Mnuchin and General Joe Dunford, who are joining our board. They bring a wealth of expertise and knowledge and context into the U.S. government and U.S. allies abroad that really form part of the core of our customers in the next, few years. And so those connections we value very strongly. Also, of course, the operational capacity and the experience they bring to the table, right? So this match, I think, was really, really good for us, and we're very happy to have them on board.
Right. And then another one, the deal related, because I don't think I've seen this a lot or frequently from recently deSPAC companies, but you announced a share repurchase program. So $5 million a repurchase. Sort of what was the thinking behind that?
Sure, and the thinking is, look, we look at the stock value today, and we think that the stock is the company is fundamentally undervalued there. So we want to show that we're ready to support the stock, and I think that's that's the main signal that we want to send, that we consider the stock to be undervalued right now.
Have you completed that, or is that sort of in the works still?
That's in the works. Yeah.
Got it.
Can we talk a little bit about kind of practical use cases of the technology? You know, you've outlined a number of use cases across energy infrastructure, a number of verticals, and where are you seeing kind of the most activity right now?
Sure. And I think for this, the best thing is to understand the change that we're bringing to this industry, right? Earth observation data has been proven to be very, very useful for a wide number of applications. But up until now, it's only been accessible, high resolution data for large governments and for very large companies or corporations with a gigantic funding for data, right? And what we are doing, because we have 100 times better unit economics on the cost of collecting each square kilometer of data, because we're going out and putting all these satellites with the intention to remap the entire surface of the Earth, first weekly and then every day. What we're doing is democratizing access to this information, making it available and distributing the data at the right price point so that we can start supporting applications that have currently been priced out from being able to use satellite data. And the reality is, there's a ton of different ways in which we use observations and data about what's happening in the world to make decisions. But we retrieve this data not from satellites because they're expensive. We typically use helicopters or drones or airplanes. But most commonly, what we do is we send people in the ground to go take measurements of things, right? I mean, you will want to see, okay, what's going on in that particular field. How high is the corn? You're going to call someone on the phone and say, hey, can you drive by and tell me how high was the corn in the field, right? And this is, we do it this way because it's the most efficient way we have found to collect data of what's happening around the world. What we think is when we deliver on this infrastructure in orbit that allows us to remap the entire planet at 70 centimeters of resolution or 40 centimeters of resolution every day, we will have the ability to replace a lot of these other ways and means that people have been collecting data today. And this will make processes for decision-making more efficient for governments, of course, for traditional applications like defense and intelligence, but also for a lot of different applications that require data from the world, like insurance or commodity trading, agriculture, forestry, infrastructure monitoring. So all of this industries already use information about what's happening in the world. They just use information that is either very expensive, very hard to come by, or that is stale, right? Because they're using information that's been, a few weeks old. What we want to do is we want to give everybody the ability to use current information at the right price point to support their applications. I think this is what's really unique about what we're bringing to the market, this democratization.
Yeah. And just getting a little more granular of that announced, the backlog that you have disclosed. What does that look like kind of on an end market or application basis? If you could give us more color on that.
Yeah, today, I think roughly 50% of that today is in the commercial side. In the agriculture is a significant portion of it. And the other 50% roughly is in defense and intelligence and the government side, right? Which are still the largest users of Earth observation today. And the reality is we have currently 17 satellites operating in orbit. We have the ability to revisit any point on the planet, 3-4 times per day. But we're still at a moment with 17 satellites even where it's getting the data to customers still requires us to go and point the satellites to the targets that they want. We're not yet fully deployed in terms of being able to distribute this data to every customer in the world at the right price point. So for the next 2 years, most of our business is going to continue to come from the traditional applications of Earth observation, mostly in the government side, defense and intelligence being probably the latest use case. But as we launch more satellites and we start remapping the Earth and delivering data to customers with zero marginal cost, basically at the right price points for their applications, we will start to be able to drive more into the commercial market. And we expect over time that the commercial market will significantly outpace the government and defense and intelligence piece by a lot.
And then speaking of that government component, that dovetails nicely with your Palantir partnership. So maybe you could elaborate a bit on that and how that's kind of a symbiotic relationship between you two.
Sure, and that's really a great match. And we don't, we are a data collection company in a sense, right? We are putting this infrastructure in orbit to go and collect data very efficiently around the world. But we don't expect to be the company doing the analytics on top of the data to deliver what the end customers want. We always think of that piece by being done by some of our partners, right? And Palantir is a great example. We have other partnerships that we're building for that. And eventually the goal is to open up our data as a service platform so that any company in the world can become our partner and deliver their own applications based on this data source. Now, with Palantir, they're a great distribution channel for us because we can give them our data. They can get the data and process it, analyze it, and get it in the hands of the end customers, particularly in the government side and defense and intelligence side, but increasingly also on the commercial side where they're having a lot of growth. We're also internally using Palantir's products. We're using Foundry and Palantir's products to build up or processing pipelines and to look, to have a deeper look into how we operate our own company, which is also great. It's part of a partnership that we have. And finally, together, we're starting to develop some new technology around processing data on the edge, around being able to implement some of the analytics that Palantir is working on directly in orbit, where we collect the data in the satellites, to be able to deliver faster insights to customers, basically. And so those three things are the pillars of our partnership that has been very successful. We're expecting to grow significantly this year.
This is obviously a very capital intensive business. And, given kind of the market conditions, stocks that have kind of delayed paths to profitability are being negatively affected. So talk to us a little bit about how your timing in terms of cash flow positivity and earnings and getting green.
Yeah, the good thing is that the proceeds of the transaction that we just closed really get us on a path where we can execute our plan over the next couple of years. We can put our constellation of satellites in orbit, and we can get towards an EBITDA positive position. From a cash flow perspective, there's still investments in CapEx that we're going to be doing by building up our constellation, and we don't expect to be cash flow positive for a few years, but we will show profitability earlier.
How do you guys achieve such a attractive cost structure relative to some of the competitors out there?
Yeah, and this is really the key of what we do, right? Getting the satellites there, our bill of materials for satellites around $450,000. We can put them in orbit for a fully loaded cost of less than $1 million. And these satellites can collect data continuously, right? So we only need, a handful of satellites to remap the entire planet. Mm-hmm. And this is what I mentioned before, 100 times better unit economics. And there's two things to that. First is the technology. We developed a new camera technology to collect data from orbit that really maximizes how much you can collect from a small satellite, from a small telescope aperture. This gives us an advantage of 10 times. So each of our satellites can collect 10 times more data than any other small satellite. And on top of that, we became, over the last 10 years, a completely vertically integrated company. So we build everything that goes into our satellites, all of the sensors, the actuators, the onboard computers, the cameras, and so on. This vertical integration also gives us around a 10x advantage in terms of CapEx cost. You put these two things together, satellites that collect 10 times more data that cost 10 times less, and you have this 100 times better unit economics. But we have been pushing for this because this supports our business model, right? This is the only way to put enough satellites in orbit that you remap the planet and start distributing data at the right price point. So we've been we've been focusing a lot on this, and I think this had been a single focus since we started the company around 11 years ago. Mm-hmm. And it's been a road to get here, right? It's not an overnight thing.
Yeah, and so on that, it seems it's early days of commercialization of the product. And so just curious as to your thoughts and sort of, I know I've read the materials and looked at the projections. How do you view that ramp up to sort of full scale commercialization of the satellites looking like?
Sure. And I think there are two markets here. There's the existing Earth observation market, that I mentioned before, mostly governments, large part of it, defense and intelligence. This is a well-known market, right? This is a market that is, maybe $2 billion of high resolution imagery sales a year. And, this is a market with a handful of players. There might be 5, 6 players around the world that are, that are selling to this market. In this particular market, we have a great value proposition. We have a lot of data, a lot of volume of satellites, a lot of revisits that will increase over time. And we also have the lower cost, if you want, to deliver, right? So we think this combination of the largest volume of data and the lower cost will allow us to capture our fair share, if you want, of this competitive market, which is the government side, right? And this supports one of our lines of revenue over the next few years. Alone, with this market alone, we can build a company, that's going to generate $300, $400, $500 million in revenue in the next few years. Now, on top of that, what we are doing that is unique to us is we will be distributing our data. Once we have the ability to remap the planet, we will be able to put our data in the hands of everybody else, all of the commercial companies, all of the small value-added service providers, the university students, the small companies around the world to profit from this data. And that is a data as a service play, if you want. It's similar to a software as a service platform where we will open up this data and allow people to use it at the right price point for all these different applications. And we expect that line of business to grow in a SaaS, if you want, growth trajectory, right? And that is what constitutes the other part, if you want, the hockey stick part of our projections, that are driven by the adoption of the software as a service or DaaS platform that we will build on top of this unique data source, right? And so you put those things together and we have a very basic, very stable base business in the government, defense and intelligence side in an existing market. And we are developing a completely new opportunity on the commercial side.
Right. Everyone talks about the ability to daily remap the world. Why is that so important, and how close are you guys to being able to achieve that?
Sure. So we don't have the ability to do that today, right? And the thing is, we are trying to manage this planet with a lot of volatility, right? With a lot of complexity, without being able to measure what we're managing. And this is true for governments. It's true, for corporations, and it's true even for individuals, right? We have, really no way of knowing what's going on in the planet. And so we think there's tremendous value there. Now, what is daily enough? Should we eventually get to remapping the entire world every hour? I think so. I think we will eventually get to the point where we can see everything that's happening on Earth in real time, right? I think there's no reason why we wouldn't get there eventually. Now, the question is always, what is economically feasible and reasonable to do at each time? And we think right now, if you go way below 1 week of remapping, right, the ability to remap the world every week, there's not a lot of applications, right? Most of the applications in the world require that you have a weekly view. If you're thinking about agriculture, you're thinking about forestry, thinking about infrastructure monitoring, you're thinking about insurance, you need to make decisions on a weekly basis. So you have to have information on a weekly basis, right? If you go to other applications like, managing patterns of lives in cities, mobility and so on, you need to be able to have at least daily data, right? You're going to wake up every day and say, okay, what roads are closed? What roads are open, right? So I think there's a number of applications there. Now, of course, we can also see a number of applications for hourly remaps, right? If we could get remaps every 15 minutes of every city in the world, we could tell you where the parking spots are, right? I think that's great. Now, does the parking spot application justify the investment to go from, daily to 15 minutes? Probably not by itself, right? So it's all, or not today by itself, right? So it's always a combination of what's the cost of putting the infrastructure there, what applications you enable. And we think weekly world remaps, which is where we're going to get to next year, is already a great start. We see an immediately addressable market once we hit weekly remaps of around $40 billion just in these verticals that I mentioned, from agriculture to insurance. And on top of that, when we go from weekly to daily, we see this total addressable market increasing significantly by maybe another $100 billion of applications that become available. And that's, for us, that $140 billion market, if you want, total addressable market, it's kind of what we're setting our eyes on.
This may be a rookie question, but it's something I've always thought about, and I've asked some of your companions. there are no privacy concerns with collecting all this satellite data. I can see, sovereigns being sensitive to certain things. Is there anything from a privacy standpoint that we should be thinking about?
So not on an individual level, right? At this resolution, 70 centimeters of resolutions, we can see, small vehicles, we can see cars, we can see small boats and so on, but we can't identify specific people, right? And so, there are no privacy concerns on an individual level. At the nation state level, there might be, right? If you're Russia and you're moving your troops to the Ukrainian border, you might not want people to notice until the very last minute what you're doing, right? And so there are, of course, this certain privacy concerns. Now the reality is, this is fair game, right? Outer space is not part of the aerial control space of any nation, and so this has been known for a very long time. Governments have satellites in orbit. They can use the satellites to monitor what other governments are doing. And in a sense, this is useful not only for defense applications, right? It's also useful for things like food security. If you're a country, that's dealing with a drought and you want to trade with your neighbors, in wheat, for example, it's great if you know how much they're producing, right? And so it really affects a lot of different things that governments do. And I think in a sense, what we are doing is bringing this possibility, the ability to look at what your neighbors are doing and use that information to trade. We're bringing this to every government in the world instead of this being just the faculty of a few, governments that have the budgets to put very expensive Earth observation satellites out there. We think this democratization of data, again, it's going to impact in better efficiencies in markets around the world and globally save us a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
I think the market was a little confused by, your announcement that you downsized the constellation size, yet you're very much committed to your goal of daily global mapping. So talk to us a little bit about those dynamics and elucidate that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's normal that people focus on numbers like, okay, how many satellites do you have in orbit, right? But and it's fine if I tell you I was planning on having 300 satellites and now I'm saying I have 200 satellites, you say what happens, right? But the reality is the opposite. I mean, we don't really care, nobody really cares in the end how many satellites we have in orbit. You do care about what we can do with the satellites, right? And what happened here is we are constantly improving on the technology of the satellites that we built. We figured out a way to do more with less, right? So we figured out a way to collect more data with our next satellite design. So that means we can do our daily remaps of the entire planet. And instead of needing 300 satellites to do that, we can do that with a little bit over 200 satellites, right? What that means in the end is there's going to be CapEx savings, right, in building this infrastructure, and there's going to be savings in our, CapEx renewal rate, basically. So it's good news all around. Even though, of course, if you focus on the number of satellites, it sounds that we downsize, but in the end, it's just savings.
And then dovetailing to that, the production of these satellites just sounds like an immensely complicated, enterprise. Tell us a little bit about kind of lessons learned in your, production in Uruguay and, how you're exploring, reducing cost and gaining efficiencies there in the production.
Yeah, and that's correct. I mean, I always tell people, satellites are machines that are significantly less complex than a car, right? I mean, if you really have a problem in building a car and you mess it up, people die, right? And if you have a problem in a satellite design, the most that can happen is you're going to lose the satellite, right, and try again. Like, this is not really that complicated, and yet we build satellite. We build cars by the millions, right? So we should be able to build the satellites and and mass produce them. So what we did in our pilot plant in Uruguay is we worked on the processes to be able to mass produce the satellites, right? In Uruguay itself, we have the ability to produce up to 24 of the satellites per year with our assembly lines that we have there. And when we looked at growing our capacity to where we needed, we decided that Uruguay wasn't the place. We wanted to be somewhere, particularly after looking at the dynamics of supply chains, transformations through the pandemic. We say, well, we want to be closer to our suppliers, right? And it turns out 75% of our supply is coming from Europe. So we said, okay, we need to put our manufacturing, our assembly and integration facility close to our suppliers. So we know, we can drive a truck, worst case, and we're going to get our supplies. So we started looking for a place to grow in Europe, and we ended up settling in the Netherlands, where we're setting up our high throughput manufacturing facility. We're going to take what we learned in Uruguay and we're going to turn it up a notch. So instead of 24 satellites per year, or high throughput facility will be able to produce 100 satellites per year. Now, that sounds like a big jump, but in reality, it's not so big of a jump going from 24 to 100. It's the same processes, the same mechanisms that we have already perfected in Uruguay that we're going to be implementing in the Netherlands. It just, four assembly lines instead of one assembly line, right? And that gives us the scalability that we need. Over time, we expect that most of the satellites that will constitute our fleet will be coming out of a Netherlands facility.
Right. So for me, the billion-dollar question, say I'm a brand new investor to the satellite space. How am I supposed to think about going with the Satellogic versus maybe a Planet who has earlier to commercial, or a Black Sky or a Maxar? How do I think about that decision?
Yeah, look, I think total addressable market is one way to think about it. What we're opening up by democratizing access to information, by remapping the Earth and putting this data available, it's a significantly larger market than the existing market for high resolution Earth observation, right? The SAS, the DAS component there is very different. I would think about it, kind of traditional Earth observation and what other high resolution Earth observation companies are doing today. You can think this is kind of, the Encyclopedia Britannica, right? It's great. It's very curated source of data, just very expensive, and only a few people use it every once in a while, right? We are building the Wikipedia of Earth observation. So we're going to be collecting data every single day of every square foot of the surface of the planet. And we're going to make this available so that everybody can tap into this source of data every day for every little thing, right? Like you forget something today and you go to your phone and check Wikipedia, right? I want you to forget what's going on somewhere and go to your phone, and go check, hey, what's going on today in Ukraine? And you'll be able to take your own phone and go see, right? Without having to have this mediated by a large number of, organizations around the world. And I think that democratization of Earth observation data is really what we're going for. Now, in reality, we don't expect end users to pick up their phone and go see what's happening in Ukraine, but we do expect that, small companies all around the world will be building apps that use this data, right? Every single day. And that's the goal.
I'm sure a lot of market procrastinators would love to be live looking at what's going on in Ukraine. So do you see potential consolidation in the industry going forward? Could you be an M&A target? Are you looking to make acquisitions of smaller companies?
So I think the answer is probably yes. Today, I think most of the consolidation is going to be vertical consolidation. I expect there's going to be consolidation between analytic companies and data acquisition companies, and there's going to be, more consolidation for us. For example, we continue to be focused on vertical integration, although we know that we are not going to deliver analytics to our customers, but we continue to make investments across our supply chain, and we will continue to make investments across our supply chain. I think, of course, the series of SPAC transactions that happened have pumped a lot of new cash into this particular industry, and also given a series of companies a good platform with liquid stock to go and make acquisitions. So I do expect that this is going to be part of what happens. Now, when it comes to data suppliers, I don't see a rush there for any consolidation. I think there's still a lot of room for growth for a large number of data suppliers, including everybody that's public now. Mm-hmm. So I don't see that happening anytime soon.
No, it makes sense. And hey, Emiliano, really thanks for telling the story. A bit of a fun one. We've been trying this to end. What's the best book you've read in the last year?
Oh, wow.
or movie or podcast.
Or will all of your satellites be named after women? Will all of them be named after women?
Yes, well, the best book I have to say, actually, it was a travel book. I just read last week a great book, and this year it's been very short so far. So right. I just read last week a great book by Gerald Durrell about his travels in Patagonia, where I was heading with my daughter to show her the penguins, and I think it was a great read. And yeah, I mean, we for a while, we have been looking at the issues in our industry in particular, and Satellogic started to face, particularly in Satellogic, about our issues in, in gender diversity. We were when we started paying attention to this very closely, we were around 12% women in the company, and we thought, this didn't make any sense, right? So we started a big push internally to fix this. And part of that was we wanted to start bringing attention to women in STEM in general. So we decided to name, and we will continue to name, every satellite that we launch after, impactful women in STEM around the world. So as a way to, bring this issue up. And for us internally, we've improved a bit. We're a little bit over 17% now, but we still have a long way to go. So as an industry, I think this is, one, not only for us, but tech industry in general, I think this is one of our, big pendings. So we really want to do our part.
Well, great. Again, appreciate the time, and we look forward to following the progress here.
All right. Thank you, guys.